Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, and good morning. As you may have guessed, I am Dharmendra Modha. On behalf of IBM's Almaden Research Center, on behalf of IBM's Research Division, and on behalf of whole of IBM, I would like to warmly welcome each one of you to the 2006 Almaden Institute on Cognitive Computing. As you may realize from the flashing names, there are representatives from over 50 different organizations in the room here today. Participants have come from both public and private sectors, universities, government, industry, startup, venture capital firms, media, and think tanks. The event is being simulcast live to IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in both Yorktown Heights and in Hawthorne. So once again, I would like to thank all of you for being here and welcome you. Almaden Institute is a very special kind of an event. Almaden Institute is a forum. It is a dialogue. It is an exchange. The goal is to learn from each other. But the ultimate goal of Almaden Institute is to stir up constructive action that leads to significant positive change in the direction of science, technology, business, and society at large. Almaden Institute is like an intense beam of searchlight that focuses every year on a different timely topic. In past, we have covered nanotechnology, future of work, privacy, autonomic computing, and healthcare. And each of the past institutes have had a significant impact on the field that they have chosen. This year, we shall discuss cognitive computing. Let me briefly frame what cognitive computing is. Perhaps the most enigmatic and most profound open question of our time is, what is mind? Each of us has one, at least one. Yet, there is no formal definition, specification for what mind is. Roughly speaking, mind is a tightly intertwined collection of cognitive processes of perception, memory, language, learning, intelligence, will, and eventually consciousness. Buddha said, we are what we think. With our mind, we make the world. So mind is our most important possession. Where does the mind come from? Well, ancient Greeks thought mind comes from the diaphragm. Shakespeare explained his confusion by having Portia say in Merchant of Venice, tell me where fancy is bred, or in the heart, or in the head. Today we know that fancy and all other cognitive phenomena are definitively bred in the head, in the brain. Superficially, brain is a 3-pound piece of meat, 80% of which is water. But at a functional level, brain can be thought of as a graph, a directed graph. The nodes of the brain graph are computational building blocks, the neurons. And the edges between the neurons, the synaptic interconnections, form the directed graph. The function of each neuron is to connect electrical stimulation from those neurons that connect to it and decide whether or not to propagate this stimulation, the disturbance further, and if so, at what rate and at what intensity. The cycle of electrical stimulation begins in the receptor neurons of senses and internal neurons that regulate the body. It is also known that brain is composed of large number of subsystems, such as the cortex, the hippocampus, the thalamus, the basal ganglia. Each of the subsystems is remarkably homogeneous and may, in fact, be governed by a canonical or universal algorithm. So we talked about the mind, we talked about the brain, and that brings us to the main theme. What we are going to examine at the highest level is the question in neurophilosophy: how does the mind arise from the brain? In other words, we're going to focus, since IBM is not in the business of philosophy, a slight variant of this question, computational neurophilosophy. Is there a computational, mechanistic, mathematical theory of how the cognitive processes of the mind arise from the hardware and software of the brain? Such a study is cognitive computing. Cognitive computing is a study of computer science-style hardware and software, algorithms and architectures that are consistent with known body of facts about neuroscience and exhibit cognitive phenomena. Very simply speaking, cognitive computing is what a philosopher does when he puts neuroscience together with computer science to explain psychology. Cognitive computing is about engineering the mind by reverse engineering the brain. So these 2 days are about open discussion and open forum. As you can tell from the agenda, at this forum, IBM is not preaching. Rather, we are reaching, we are searching, and we are researching. And what makes this exploration very timely is 4 trends. First trend is excess amount of accumulated data about how the brain works at a neuroanatomical, neurophysiological, neuroelectrical, etc. levels. Second trend is tremendous rise in availability of computation power, such as blue gene. For example, a blue gene sits approximately under the very podium on which I stand here today. The third trend is that startups and other business activity designed to harness the power of cognitive computing is on the rise. And finally, the fourth and the most important trend, the trend that we shall focus on, is that there are certain eminent minds of our time, from neuroscience, from computer science, from electrical engineering, from psychology, from neurology, from philosophy, from information theory, from bioengineering, who are beginning to have a dream, a vision of putting together a grand theory, an overarching theory, a top-down theory of how the brain works that is consistent with the body of known data about the brain. So in case you're wondering who these eminent minds are, well, wonder no further. They are here. They are our speakers, they are the panelists, and they are many of the august attendees. So these 2 days, our hope is to engage in debate and discussion to put the whole puzzle together. And the end goal is to inspire our minds and to energize the brains to significantly quicken the pace of innovation in cognitive computing. So those are my remarks to frame this institute and to put the light on the motive for which we brought these people together. So now, before we plunge straight into the technical heart of the matter, I'd like to take a few minutes just to tell you about the breadth, the depth, and the history of Almaden Research Center. And to do this, I would like to introduce a very special person, Dr. Mark Dean. Dr. Mark Dean is the Vice President of Almaden Research Center. He's an IBM Fellow. That award is our highest technical award, and only 50 people from a company of over 300,000 are currently active IBM Fellows. Dr. Mark Dean has made numerous contributions to IT industry. In particular, he was the chief engineer for the development of IBM PC-AT, the ESA system bus, and PS2 model 7080. One of these inventions eventually earned him a place in the Inventors Hall of Fame, which is a very rare honor. There are only about 2 other active IBMers with this distinction. He has numerous other honors. He's a member of IBM Technology, member of National Academy of Engineering, a fellow of IEEE, a fellow of AAAS, and many, many others. He has many awards from IBM. He has a PhD in Stanford. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Dean to the stage.
Thanks, Amindra. Good morning. This is a different group than my traditional research team. Most of them sit in the far back, and these seats are all empty, so it's quite a bit of difference. So I got to get used to this. Beautiful day outside. I get to come to work every day to this facility. It's an honor and a pleasure. And you're going to get to meet some of the people that I get to work with every day, just tops in their field, and it's a job, a dream job for me. Many of the people know that this is a job that I've dreamed about having. I got lucky enough to be standing in the right place at the right time to have the honor to be here. So thanks for coming. I really look forward to this next 2 days. As you may know or may not know, we've been doing this. This is our 6th Almaden Institute. The previous institutes have yielded very interesting insights. They have started research activities and that are continuing and have actually made significant impact on not only IBM and what it's doing, but the field of science. And I think that's an important message for me to deliver, is that IBM research is a science research operation. It is an exploratory research area. We do study science. We do look into things that other people don't look into or have not yet looked into. We work to be leaders in many of the fields that hopefully at some point will impact our business. And I think that's key. And I want that to be a key message because I think that's important. We have survived many years. This is our 20th anniversary here in Almaden. And we're very proud of the things that we've been able to contribute. And we're continuing to explore new space in computer science, raw technology, storage systems in a new area that we're pushing hard into, and we're calling it services science. Just like computer science was created 50, 60 years ago, we're working to create what we think could be another discipline, and we're calling it services science. So this institute, this particular institute, is very important because it's actually a start to a set of research projects that Demindra will actually be leading. So think of this as a start to what we hope will be a collaboration of mine across not just IBM, but across the science and the types of things that you in this room are actually trying to do. So I'm interested and excited about what we might discover. Because I personally think we need a change. The IT industry has been doing what we've been doing for years. We've been doing computing, right? We design computers to compute. But one of our challenges now is how do we deal with information? How do we handle all this data that's being created? And I personally think that it's time to change it. Instead of building computers, we need to build systems that are more focused on data, handling data. We've kind of got this computing thing figured out, right? We can do some more tweaks, but we kind of figured it out. But this mass amount of data, we're drowning in it. And there's long lost opportunity in the information that we've been storing. And we need to kind of figure out how to do that better. So I'm hoping this will be one of the possible areas that we might be able to leverage and build things a little differently. Think about systems a little differently than the way we've been thinking about them. So I hope you take that to heart. I'm very honored to have the distinguished speakers and guests that we have today. You'll get to interact among yourselves and with members of the IBM research community, not just here, but we have visitors also from our other research labs. I should mention that this is one of 8 research labs, although I'm biased, this is the prettiest of the research facilities. We might get some arguments from some of our sister communities, but I think it's hard to argue driving up here that is not maybe one of the prettiest facilities that we have. So without taking any more time, and to make sure we keep rolling, I think Deminder's going to come up and introduce our first speaker. Thank you for coming. Enjoy, relax, and maybe you'll get a little bit of time to enjoy the weather. Most of the time we want you in here, but you'll get a little bit of time to enjoy the weather. Deminder, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. So, this session, the first session, I'll be introducing the session chair, will be chaired by the Honorable Mr. Daniel Golden. He is the chairman and CEO of the Intellisys companies, which focus on high-tech consulting and development of biologically inspired computers and robots. Previously, Mr. Daniel Golden served as the NASA administrator from 1992 to 2001. He directly served under 3 U.S. presidents. Before NASA, he served as the VP and general manager of TRW Space and Technology Group, and he began his career at NASA's Glenn Research Center. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He is a fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He graduated from the City College of New York. And it's a tremendous honor for me to welcome Mr. Daniel Golding to the stage to introduce our first speaker.
I have the distinct honor today of introducing a person I greatly admire, Dr. Gerald Edelman. Dr. Edelman is the director of the Neurosciences Institute and the Neurosciences Research Foundation, which is a not-for-profit, publicly funded institute that's the parent to the Neurosciences Institute. Dr. Edelman has dedicated his professional career to expanding our knowledge of the fundamentals, expanding the boundaries of our fundamental scientific understanding. He has pioneered in the field of biophysics, protein chemistry, immunology, cell biology, and neurobiology. Many of his discoveries have led to approaches, processes, products that have improved the quality of life for many on our planet over decades. His early studies on the structure and diversity of antibodies led to the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1972, and his discoveries ended one phase of immunology and started up a whole new phase of immunology. His studies in embryological development led to the discovery of cell adhesion molecules, which has been found to guide the fundamental processes by which animals achieve shape and form and by which the nervous system is formed. Dr. Edelman formulated a detailed theory called neural Darwinism to explain the organization of higher-order brain functions. He and his colleagues at the Neurosciences Institute have over the past 2 decades developed a broad range of brain-based devices as a research tool to understand the brain functions. His most recent work has explored the neural basis of consciousness. I'd like to introduce to you a man who has inspired much of my recent work and one who has many, many years to inspire generations around this planet.
Thank you, Dan. Some days before the opening night of his play, Man and Superman, George Bernard Shaw sent a letter to Winston Churchill. It said, "Enclosed are 2 tickets to the opening night of Man and Superman. Bring a friend if you have one." Churchill wrote back and said, "Thank you for the 2 tickets. Could you send me 2 more if there's a second night, if there is one?" Well, I am happy to see many friends in this audience and also look forward to the first and second days of this grand meeting. I want to thank Dr. Moda and our hosts at Almaden for a signal opportunity. It may seem strange, in fact it is unusual for an empirical scientist to talk about the mind, but not for poets and philosophers. Take, for example, this remarkable fragment from Marianne Moore, the American poet, who said, "The mind is an enchanting thing, is an enchanted thing like the glaze on a katydid wing, subdivided by sun till the nettings are legion, like Giza King playing Scarlatti." And notice the little hint of neuroanatomy in there. The great philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead, in his book Science in the Modern World, pointed out that at the very beginnings of Western science, the mind was removed from nature. Here are two of the people whom he singled out. The first one is Galileo Galilei, who most reasonably might be considered the founder of modern physics, certainly, and possibly even the modern scientific approach of experiment as well as hypothesis. He removed the mind for practical reasons. In his essay, The Assayer, he says, "I know that if there were no animals, there'd be no green or warm, but that isn't my concern." So it was for pragmatic reasons. Sometime later, René Descartes, in a search for a method beyond doubt, came to think that there were two kinds of epochs in our life. The first was res extensa, extended things, susceptible to physics, and the other was res cogitans, which was not extended and therefore was inaccessible to physics. Thus began the whole notion of dualism, which persists to this day and certainly is involved in all of our language. Of course, I think it's wrong, but when you think that Descartes is wrong, you wish you could play his wrong notes. The mind was put back into nature, I think, by William James and Wilhelm Wundt in Germany, sort of at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And his book, the great book, The Principles of Psychology, still stands as one of the best phenomenological descriptions of consciousness. Well, since then, as you've heard from Dr. Moda, there have been many advances, and some of these are listed here. We can now actually come down to experimental and theoretical analyses that tell us how the brain is put together, what its fundamental operations are, and how we might connect psychology to biology in terms of perception, memory, and even consciousness. We all know what consciousness is. It is that which you lose when you fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, and that which you gain when you wake up again. It seems strange because it combines privacy with ongoing unity and at the same time a remarkable variability from day to day. And the question is, how can we explain this in scientific terms? Well, in this lecture, what I would like to do is approach that problem and consider what we must consider and see how that all turns out. I believe that that requires 4 points. The first is we have to have a global brain theory. It's important because consciousness being at the height of all of these other operations, if you don't have a fundamental base, there's a chance you will go off kilter. The second thing we need to do is show what properties of neuronal populations are in fact responsible for the features of consciousness. The third thing we must do is to find ways of measuring neural correlates of consciousness experimentally. And finally, what we must do is show what the difference is in the brain between those aspects of the brain that give rise to consciousness and those that do not. So in this lecture, that's what I'm going to do, very quickly review some of these facts. And I needn't point out to this audience here that the cerebral cortex is the key evolutionary event that changed Homo sapiens and gave us all of our properties that go beyond the rest of the animal kingdom. I also needn't point out that there are reasonable structures here. As you can see, the Golgi stain of the 6-layered structure of the cortex, and I haven't, for interest of time, gone to how it might hook up in input-output relationships, but there are a set of relationships, at least at one level, of all of these neuronal inputs and outputs. And of course, the neuron itself is the key, and what has happened in recent times is a remarkable elaboration of what happens at the synapse. After the action potential comes and there's release of neurotransmitter from the vesicles in the synaptic cleft and binding to the postsynaptic neuron. Indeed, great progress has been made biophysically for accounting for how synaptic change occurs, how there is strengthening and weakening, changes in efficacy. And here are 2 of the outstanding rules still being expressed. The first, the spike timing dependent plasticity. The second, the Bienenstock BCM model of Bienenstock-Cooper and Moser. So the fact is that the interesting thing is, can we reconcile these two features? In any event, these features have the quality of precision, and it is an interesting thing that they have not yet been fully reconciled. Eugene Ishikevich and Neeraj Desai have shown that if there's a Poisson distribution and weak correlation amongst neural firings, that you can show a relationship between the two. I dare say Dr. Markram will be considering some of this. Well, if all of this is true and we're making these advances, why is the brain not a computer? Well, as you all can see, this is a reflection of Turing's theorem, a finite state automaton under guidance of a program in which it can read, write, erase, and move at an endless tape and change state. And Turing's great achievement was to show that there is a universal Turing machine which, in fact, can carry out any set of effective procedures or algorithms. So why not the brain? Well, I want to dedicate my remarks to pointing out that, in fact, the brain is not a computer in that sense, that, in fact, what it is more like an evolutionary jungle. If you look here at this picture of primeval forest with setting sun of Le Douanier Rousseau, one of the early Impressionists, and you remove the man and the jaguar, I think it's more like that. That is to say, it has structure, but it has enormous variability. And if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this lecture, is the fact that the brain is the most extraordinarily variable structure imaginable, that the individuality of each brain in this room is simply striking, and at the same time, the integrative powers are enormous, and so that poses what the question is. So let me start by making that argument. Here's a little course in neuroembryology. After fertilization, in about 100,000 cells after cell division, a flat plate will turn around and become, as you see here, a neural tube. At the same time, after this tube fills with fluid, cells going into the plane of the board, actually from various proliferative regions, will move to make the layers that I showed you in the previous slide, or will move, as in the olfactory system, in considerable distances from the nasal receptors to the olfactory bulb, ultimately giving a very detailed anatomical structure. Well, the interesting thing is this: although there are populations that can be predicted in movement, the individual neurons cannot. From individual to individual, even